Thera, a young alien girl from a distant planet, was alone and broken. Her ship had crashed on Earth after a fierce battle in space. The wreckage of her ship lay scattered in a remote wilderness, far from any help. She was weak and bleeding, barely able to stay conscious. Her home planet was hundreds of light years away, and she knew that help wouldn't come in time. She had no choice but to rely on her own strength, but it was fading fast. Thera's people were known across the galaxy for their resilience. They had evolved to survive even in the harshest conditions, but this time it wasn't enough. She had been part of a special mission, sent to Earth to find a cure for a deadly plague that was slowly killing her people. Her mission had been a desperate hope, one last chance for survival. But now, as she lay in the wreckage of her ship, she feared she might not make it. Her breathing was shallow, and every movement felt like an effort. Her body ached from the crash, and the cold of the night crept through her thin, damaged suit. She was alone, stranded on a strange planet, far from home. The technology on her ship was too damaged to send a distress signal, and she had no way of contacting her people. It felt like the end of the road. Thera tried to move, to find shelter, but her limbs were too weak. Her mind was foggy, and she felt like she was slipping away. She closed her eyes for a moment, hoping for rest, but deep down, she knew that if she fell asleep, she might never wake up. The stars above seemed distant and uncaring. Her life had been full of purpose, of missions and goals, but now she was a forgotten soul on an unknown world. Then, through the haze of pain and fear, she heard a sound. It was faint at first, like a rustling of leaves. Thera opened her eyes, blinking to clear her vision. She saw a figure through the fog. It was a human, a man walking through the forest, his figure framed by the pale light of the moon. Thera's first instinct was to hide, to retreat. Humans were not known to be kind to aliens, especially those who were different. She had heard stories of how her kind had been feared and hunted, and she had no reason to trust this human. But there was something in the man's expression, something in the way he moved, that made her hesitate. The man, Zach, had been hiking through the wilderness, far from civilization. He loved the peace of nature, the quiet that came with being away from the noise of the world. He didn't expect to find anything unusual that night, just the usual sounds of the forest. But as he walked, he noticed something strange, a glint of metal in the distance, partially hidden by trees. Curiosity led him closer. When he saw the wreckage of the ship and the strange, injured figure lying beside it, his heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anything like it. The alien girl was beautiful, though battered and bruised. Her skin was a strange shade, not like anything he had ever seen before, and her body language screamed of fear and pain. She looked like she had been through a terrible ordeal. Without thinking, Zach rushed forward. His instincts told him to help, to do whatever he could. He knelt beside her and gently touched her arm, trying to reassure her. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, his voice calm and soothing. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Thera flinched at the touch, but she didn't pull away. Her mind was spinning, struggling to process the situation. She could barely understand what the human was saying. All she knew was that she was in no condition to fight or run. She was too weak. But she couldn't let her guard down. She had heard stories of humans who were ruthless, who hunted down anything that was not like them. Could this human be one of those? Zach noticed her hesitation, her distrust. He didn't blame her. After all, he was a stranger, a human, and he had no idea what kind of experiences Thera had had with his species. But he couldn't leave her here to die. There was something about her, her fear, her pain, that made him want to do everything he could to help. "I can't fix you up here," Zach said, his voice gentle. "But I know a place nearby where you can rest. Please, just let me help." Thera didn't respond. She couldn't. Her body was shutting down. Every word the human said felt distant, like it was coming from a far-off dream. But despite her fear and her pride, Something inside her wanted to believe him. She didn't want to die here, alone and helpless. And yet, it felt like the end. Zach didn't give up. He carefully scooped Thera up, cradling her in his arms. Her body felt fragile, like a delicate piece of glass. She was so light, yet so very fragile. He moved with care, taking the alien girl in his arms, making sure she felt no pain. His mind raced as he carried her toward the cabin he had built for himself in the forest. He wasn't sure how he was going to save her, but he would find a way. Thera's eyes fluttered closed again, and she allowed herself to drift into unconsciousness, feeling the warmth of the human's body around her. It was the first comfort she had felt in days. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope. Zach moved swiftly through the forest, his arms cradling the fragile alien girl, his heart pounding with both urgency and compassion. The night air was cool, but the warmth from his body seemed to comfort her, even as she lay unconscious. He didn't know what had happened to her, where she had come from, or why she had crashed on Earth. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her to die alone in the wilderness. Thera's body felt light in his arms, but every step Zach took reminded him of the weight of the situation. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin was cold to the touch. He could feel her pulse, weak and irregular, but still there. It was a fragile thread of life he was trying to protect, and he wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. The cabin he had built wasn't far, but it felt like an eternity before he finally arrived. The warm glow of the small fire inside greeted him as he carefully stepped over the threshold, making sure not to jostle her. He laid Thera gently on the worn leather couch near the hearth. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the air, offering a sense of safety in the otherwise silent, dark cabin. Zach moved quickly, grabbing blankets and towels, making a place for her to rest. He had no medical training, but he knew enough to stabilize her as best as he could. He started by checking her injuries, hoping nothing was too serious. Her clothing was torn in places, revealing deep cuts and bruises across her arms and legs. Her alien skin had an odd texture, shimmering faintly in the firelight, and her hair, though tangled, was a striking shade of silver, almost metallic. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should try to treat the cuts. He didn't know what kind of alien biology he was dealing with. Would his medicine even work on her? Or would he make things worse? But time was running out. He had to try. Zach found a small first aid kit and began cleaning her wounds, doing his best to be gentle. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her people and why she was here, alone. The thought of someone so far from home, so vulnerable, made him feel protective. He was used to looking after himself, but this felt different. He didn't know if it was because she was an alien or because she was in such a dire state, but something inside him clicked. Thera stirred slightly, her breathing becoming a little deeper. Zach paused, his heart skipping a beat. Was she waking up? His thoughts raced. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face her conscious self, especially not when she had been so distant before. Would she trust him? Would she think he was some kind of threat? He was still unsure of what to expect from an alien, especially one who had crashed on Earth under such mysterious circumstances. After a moment, Thera's eyes fluttered open. They were bright and unfamiliar, their shade a glowing amber. She blinked as her surroundings came into focus. The fire, the cabin, and most of all, the human who was sitting next to her, watching her with a mixture of concern and caution. Thera's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know where she was. She remembered the crash, the pain, and then nothing. But now she was here, in a strange place, with a human sitting beside her. She was surprised to feel warmth, both physical and emotional. She had expected this human to treat her like an enemy, or worse, as prey. Instead, he had brought her to safety and was tending to her wounds with care. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? He seemed kind, but could kindness be a trap? Thera's own people had always warned her about humans, how unpredictable they could be. They had their own agenda, and they would do anything to survive. But something about Zach's eyes told her that he wasn't like the others. There was no malice in his gaze, only concern. "You're safe here," Zach said softly, trying to ease the tension in the room. "I'm not going to hurt you." Thera's voice was weak when she finally spoke. Who are you?" Her words were slow, strained, but there was a clear edge of fear in her tone. Zach gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm Zach. I live out here, away from the city. I found you after your ship crashed. You were, well, in pretty bad shape. I didn't know what happened to you, but I couldn't just leave you there." Thera's mind was spinning. She didn't understand why he was helping her, but his kindness was unmistakable. She had heard of humans being compassionate, but she had never experienced it firsthand. Perhaps there was something different about this one. He had no reason to help her, no reason to care. She was an alien, a stranger in his world. Still, his calm presence and the warmth of the fire made her feel safer than she had in hours. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to gather her strength. The exhaustion from the crash, the pain, and the uncertainty of her situation were overwhelming. But there was something inside her, a small flicker of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. Thera looked at Zach again, trying to make sense of the situation. Why are you helping me?" Zach shrugged, looking down at the floor for a moment. "I don't know. I just felt like it was the right thing to do." He met her gaze again, his eyes sincere. "You're not alone anymore. I'll help you, whatever you need." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Thera could feel deep in her chest. She had come to Earth with a mission, but now, in this strange cabin with this human, she wasn't sure what to think anymore. Was this the help she had been sent to find? Could this human, this strange man, be the key to her survival? Thera lay on the couch, her body aching, her mind struggling to keep up with everything that had happened. The fire crackled nearby, casting flickering shadows on the walls of the small cabin. Zach sat beside her, watching her closely, ready to help if she needed anything. But she felt weak, too weak to move, too weak to fight. The crash, the pain, the long, lonely hours in the wilderness, it had all drained her energy. Her breathing was still shallow, and Zach could tell that her condition wasn't improving. He had done what he could with the basic supplies he had, but it wasn't enough. Thera's wounds were more than just skin deep. Something deeper, something internal was wrong. She had been through too much, and no amount of bandages or medicine was going to fix that. Zach ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He had no medical training. He was just a regular guy who loved the outdoors. How could he help her? He looked at Thera's pale face, the beads of sweat on her forehead. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let her die here. He couldn't let her die alone. "I don't know what to do," Zach muttered to himself, pacing back and forth. "I don't even know what you are, but I can't just leave you like this." Thera, barely conscious, heard the distress in his voice. She wanted to say something, to reassure him that it was okay, but she couldn't. Her voice felt like a weight, and the effort to speak felt impossible. She closed her eyes again, letting the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. For a moment, she thought about her home, her people, and the mission she had been sent on. She had been so close to success, so close to finding the cure for the plague that was destroying her world. But now, it felt like everything was slipping away. Zach's voice broke through her thoughts. "I'm going to find help. I can't do this alone." She opened her eyes slightly, glancing at him. "No," she whispered weakly. "There is no one else." Zach knelt down beside her, taking her hand gently. "You don't know that for sure. There's got to be someone. I'll keep looking. I won't stop until I find a way to help you." Thera felt a small flicker of hope stir inside her. His words were simple, but there was something in the way he said them. Something that told her he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't like the others. The others would have left her, abandoned her, but Zach was different. He stood up determined. I'll be back soon. Stay strong. Okay, just hang in there. Thera nodded weakly, though she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. The pain was unbearable at times, and her strength was fading. But something inside her told her that she wasn't alone anymore, and that thought gave her a small measure of peace. Zack left the cabin, his mind racing. He needed help, but who could he turn to? The nearest town was miles away, and even if he got there, what could he do? He didn't have access to advanced medical technology. He didn't know anyone who could help her. But he wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. He spent the next few hours scouring the forest, hoping to find some kind of answer. His mind was filled with questions. Was she from another planet? Was she part of some larger mission? If she was, then why had she crashed here? He had so many unanswered questions, but all that mattered right now was that Thera needed him. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was beginning to set. His heart sank when he saw her lying there, still pale, her breathing labored. He rushed to her side, his fear creeping up on him again. Had she gotten worse? Was it too late? Thera, he called softly, touching her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him. She was weak, but she managed to give him a small, tired smile. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Of course I came back," Zack said, his voice steady. "You didn't think I'd leave you, did you?" Thera shook her head slightly. "I didn't know. I thought maybe I wasn't worth saving." Zack took her hand again, squeezing it gently. "Don't ever think that. You're worth saving. I don't care who or what you are. I'm not going to let you die." Thera felt tears welling up in her eyes, though she was too weak to cry properly. The kindness in his words broke something inside her. She had been so alone for so long, so focused on her mission to save her people, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, to be seen as more than just a tool, just a soldier. In this human, in Zack, she found something she hadn't realized she needed: hope. "I don't know what to do to help you," Zack continued, his voice filled with desperation. "But I'm not going to give up on you. I won't." Thera's vision was starting to blur again, but she tried to focus on him. "You already have," she whispered, before her eyelids grew heavy, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Zack stared down at her, his heart aching. He had to do something. He couldn't just wait. Thera had placed her trust in him, and he wasn't going to let her down. He didn't know how or when, but somehow he would find a way to save her. He was going to fight for her life, just as she had fought for her people's survival. And this fight, this battle, would be his greatest challenge yet. The next morning, Zack woke up with a start. He had barely slept, constantly checking on Thera throughout the night. The fire had died down to embers, but her condition hadn't improved. She lay unconscious, her skin pale, her breathing slow and shallow. Zack sat beside her, his heart heavy with worry. "I can't lose you," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything." His mind raced with thoughts of what else he could do. The cabin had only basic supplies, and there was no way he could get medical help from the town in time. He needed something more, something beyond his limited knowledge and resources. But what? As he sat there, feeling helpless, he remembered a conversation he had overheard once, years ago, while working at a local science museum. It had been about extraterrestrial life, and how some scientists believed that humans shared a strange compatibility with certain alien species. Zack had never thought much about it, chalking it up to speculation and fantasy. But now, in this moment of desperation, it felt like the only thread of hope. He stood up, pacing around the room. Maybe there's a way. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but his instinct told him he had to try. Zack opened a small cabinet in the corner of the cabin, pulling out an old, battered book on medical biology he had collected years ago. It wasn't much, but it had helped him in the past with minor injuries. He flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that could apply to Thera's condition. As he turned the pages, a word caught his eye, something about alien compatibility. His breath caught in his chest. The passage described how some rare advanced alien species shared genetic traits that allowed them to interact with human biology in unique ways. The book explained how certain alien physiology could respond to human DNA in a way that no one fully understood. There was a mention of a healing exchange, where the body of a human could help stabilize the life force of an alien in critical condition. Zach didn't know if it was true or just another piece of pseudoscience, but it was the first real lead he had. His heart raced as he read more. The idea sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but right now, he would grasp at anything to save Thera. He glanced over at her, still lying motionless on the couch, her body too weak to respond. The firelight flickered across her features, and Zach felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Could he really help her with something as strange as this? Was he ready to risk everything on a theory that might not even work? He walked over to her, kneeling by her side. "Thera," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "I don't know if this is going to work, but I have to try." Thera stirred slightly at his touch, her amber eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him with confusion, as if not fully aware of where she was or what had been happening. "Zach," she whispered, her voice faint and shaky. "I'm here," he said, giving her a gentle smile, though his insides were twisted with worry. "I'm not going anywhere. I think I might know a way to help you." Thera blinked, trying to focus on his words. She wanted to believe him, but the overwhelming pain in her body made it hard to keep her thoughts clear. "How? You can't heal me. You're just a human." Zach nodded slowly, understanding her doubt. "I know, but there's something I read about. Some rare connection between humans and certain alien species. It's supposed to help with healing. I don't know if it will work, but I'm willing to try." Thera's eyes narrowed, and she tried to sit up, wincing from the pain. "What do you mean? Are you saying that my survival depends on something from you?" Zach hesitated. "It sounds strange, but yes. It's some kind of genetic compatibility or energy exchange. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't think of anything else that could work." For a moment, there was silence. Thera closed her eyes, gathering her strength. Her mind was clouded with doubt and fear, but something in Zach's voice made her wonder if this human was truly trying to save her, or if he had some hidden agenda. She felt a deep exhaustion, both physical and emotional, that made it difficult to think clearly. The possibility of survival, even through something as mysterious as this, was too tempting to ignore. "Okay," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I trust you, Zach. Do what you need to do." Zach nodded, his heart swelling with relief and gratitude. He gently helped her lie back down, adjusting her blankets to keep her warm. The fire crackled softly, as if offering its own quiet encouragement. He stood for a moment, taking a deep breath. The plan was uncertain, but it was the only chance they had. He began to prepare, gathering what little he had in the cabin, a few basic tools, some clean cloths, and his own willpower. As he moved closer to Thera, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. It wasn't just about saving her. It was about a connection, a bond that transcended species and biology. If it worked, it could mean the difference between life and death. "Hold on," Zach whispered. "I'm not giving up on you." Thera closed her eyes, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever happened next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. Zach sat quietly beside Thera, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had read everything he could find about human-alien compatibility, but there was no clear answer. All he knew was that if he didn't try, Thera might not survive. The theory he had discovered seemed strange and unproven, but it was the only hope he had. His heart raced as he looked at her, still lying weakly on the couch, barely able to keep her eyes open. "I don't know if this will work," Zach whispered, mostly to himself, "but I have to try." "Thera," Though weak, managed to look at him. Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but there was also a flicker of trust. The pain had faded slightly, but her condition remained critical. Every breath she took seemed more fragile than the last. She couldn't afford to wait much longer. "I trust you, Zach," she said in a soft, strained voice. "Do what you must." Zach took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to focus. This was the most important thing he had ever done. If it worked, it could save her. If it didn't, they would be out of options. He glanced at the fire, its warmth filling the cabin. He had gathered everything he could think of. The basic first aid supplies, clean cloths, and a few tools that he had on hand. But most of all, he had his own willpower. He knew he couldn't give up now. "You're not alone," Zach said softly, trying to reassure both himself and Thera. "I won't let you go." Thera closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. For the first time in days, she felt a small sense of hope. The warmth of the fire, Zach's calm presence, it was more than she had dared to expect. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human could help her. Zach carefully adjusted her blankets, making sure she was comfortable. He knew he couldn't rush this. Whatever was about to happen, he needed to be patient. He gently took her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Thera nodded slowly, her breathing shallow. "I'm ready," she whispered, though the fear was still there. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she trusted Zach. And right now, that was all she had. Zach took a deep breath, focusing his thoughts. He had no idea what this process would feel like for Thara, or even for himself. But the theory he had read about suggested that there was an exchange of energy between their species, a shared connection that could stabilize her life force. He positioned himself next to her, taking her other hand. They were close, so close that he could feel her pulse, weak and erratic. He closed his eyes for a moment, preparing himself. The moment had come. There was no turning back now. "Hold on," he whispered, almost to himself. "Please, hold on." Zach gently leaned closer to Thera, his body feeling warmer in the process. A strange, tingling sensation filled the air around them, as if something was shifting between them. It wasn't painful, but it felt unfamiliar, like a current running through both of them. He didn't know if it was the healing energy or just his own nervous tension, but he could feel the connection growing stronger. Thera, too, felt something change. It was as if a warmth was flooding her body, spreading from where their hands met. Her breathing became steadier, though still faint. She didn't understand what was happening, but the energy flowing between them felt oddly comforting, like a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. She wanted to ask Zach what was happening, but her body was too weak to form the words. Minutes passed, and Zach focused on the feeling that was growing stronger with every second. It was as if their energies were blending, fusing in a way that he had never experienced before. He couldn't explain it, but he could sense it. The change in her, the slight improvement in her condition. Her pulse had become more regular, and her skin, though still pale, seemed to have a hint of color returning. Zach kept his focus, determined not to let up. He wasn't sure how long he could keep this up, but he was willing to do whatever it took. "Zach," Thera whispered, her voice stronger now. I feel better." Zach's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe it. He glanced down at her, his eyes wide with hope. She was still weak, but there was a definite change in her. The color was slowly returning to her face, and her breathing had become more steady. The pain that had gripped her before seemed to have lessened. "I'm here," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "You're going to make it." Thera looked up at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty, but also with a glimmer of something else. Hope. She had expected the worst, had almost given up on ever finding a solution. But now, in the strange warmth of the human's presence, she felt a small spark of life return. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, There was a chance for her to survive. Zach, though exhausted, couldn't stop the small smile that spread across his face. It wasn't over yet, but this was the first sign of real progress he had seen. Thera was fighting, and with that fight, he would keep fighting too. "Rest now," Zach said softly. "We'll get through this together." Thera's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself relax into the warmth of the moment. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't know how it would end, but for the first time since she crashed on Earth, she felt like there was hope for the future. The next few days passed slowly, each one bringing small improvements to Thera's condition. Her breathing became steadier, her pulse stronger. The strange bond that Zach had created between them seemed to be working, and with each passing hour, she felt a little more alive, a little more like herself. Zach stayed by her side the whole time, never leaving her for long. He'd bring her water, and when she was able, some food. His voice was always calm, and he made sure to remind her that she wasn't alone. His simple acts of care seemed to give her strength. Every time she opened her eyes and saw him there, she felt a little more hopeful. Thera still didn't fully understand what had happened between them. The healing exchange Zach had described was something beyond her comprehension, but she couldn't deny the changes she was feeling. Her energy was returning, bit by bit. The pain that had once consumed her was slowly receding. It felt like a miracle, like the impossible had been made possible. One morning, as the sun peeked through the trees outside the cabin, Thera slowly opened her eyes. The fire had burned low, and Zach was sitting nearby, his back to her. He was reading a book, one of the few things he had brought to the cabin for entertainment, though he hadn't read it much. He was too focused on her recovery. Thera stretched a little, feeling the strength in her limbs returning. She could feel the warmth of the blankets around her and the heat of the fire on her skin. She had to admit, it was the most comfortable she had been in days. When Zach turned and saw that she was awake, a wide smile spread across his face. "You're up," he said, his voice filled with relief. "How do you feel today?" Thera hesitated for a moment, assessing her body. She felt better than she had in a long time. Her energy was still low, but it was improving. Her body, though still weakened, no longer felt like it was shutting down. "I feel better," she said slowly, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel stronger." Zach's smile widened, and he moved closer to her. "That's great to hear. You've been through a lot, but I think you're going to make it. You're getting stronger every day." Thera looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never thought I would get this far. I thought I was going to die out there, alone." Zach's heart ached at her words. He had seen her at her lowest, barely clinging to life, and now, seeing her sitting up and talking, it was hard to believe how much she had changed. He had no idea how much longer it would take for her to fully recover, but he was hopeful. "I won't let that happen," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore. Thera, you have me. I'll help you get back on your feet." Thera nodded slowly. The warmth of his words made something inside her stir. She had always been so focused on her mission, on saving her people, that she had never really thought about what it meant to be cared for. To have someone who genuinely wanted to help her. It was a foreign feeling, but it was also a comforting one. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You've given me more than I could ever repay." Zach shook his head. "There's no need for thanks. I did what anyone would have done in my place. I just couldn't leave you out there like that." For a few moments, they sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Thera felt the weight of everything that had happened, the crash, the mission, her people. She had come to Earth to find a cure for the plague that had been destroying her planet. But now, after everything she had been through, she wasn't sure what her next steps should be. She had no idea how to find the cure, or even if there was one. But what she did know was that she couldn't do it alone. And perhaps with Zach's help, there was a chance. "I don't know what to do now," Thera said quietly, breaking the silence. I came here to find a cure, but everything's changed. I don't even know if it's possible anymore. Zack looked at her, his expression serious. Maybe it's not just about the cure. Maybe it's about finding a way forward, whatever that means. Thera met his gaze, her heart heavy with uncertainty. I came here to save my people. I can't just give up on them. Zack nodded. I understand, but maybe you don't have to do it all on your own. There's a whole world here that's ready to help you if you need it. Thera looked at him, a small sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. Maybe there was still a way to save her people, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do it alone. I'll help you, Zack said, his voice filled with determination. We'll figure this out together. A soft smile tugged at the corners of Thera's lips. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a future. With Zack by her side, she felt a new kind of hope rising within her. Hope for herself, for her people, and for a chance at a new life. As she looked out the window, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, Thera knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. And with that knowledge, she was ready to face whatever came next. Days turned into weeks as Thera's strength continued to grow. The fire in the hearth always seemed to burn a little brighter now, mirroring the light slowly returning to her life. She was no longer the fragile, dying alien she had been when Zack had first found her. Though she still had a long road to full recovery, each day she felt a little more like herself. Zack was with her every step of the way, always encouraging her and reminding her that she wasn't alone. The bond between them had only grown stronger, not just out of necessity, but out of a quiet, shared understanding. They had both been through a lot, but together, they had found something unexpected, a deep connection and a partnership neither of them had anticipated. Thera now sat up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the sun rise over the forest outside. The warmth of the morning light felt comforting on her skin. She had become more familiar with Earth's simple beauty. The sound of birds singing in the trees, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the peaceful quiet that came with being away from the chaos of her past. It was a place of healing, a place she hadn't known she needed. Zack walked into the room, carrying a tray with some food. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his voice warm, as always. Thera looked up at him and smiled, though it was still a bit weak. "I'm getting there," she said softly. "I feel stronger every day." Zack set the tray down beside her, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I'm glad to hear that. You've come a long way since I first found you." Thera nodded, her thoughts drifting back to that moment when she had felt so helpless, lying on the cold, hard ground. She had thought her life was over, that no one would ever find her. And yet, here she was, not just alive, but with a new sense of purpose. "I still can't believe I'm here," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the fire. "When I crashed, I thought I was going to die alone. I didn't even know if anyone would care enough to help." Zack reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. "I didn't leave you because you were an alien or because you had a mission. I helped you because you're you, and you deserve a chance to live." Thera's eyes softened. She had never expected this kind of kindness from a human. She had always seen humans as just another species, not capable of the care or compassion that Zack had shown her. But here, in this small cabin, she had learned something new, not just about humans, but about herself too. The connection they had formed was unlike anything she had ever known. It was genuine, pure, and filled with a warmth she couldn't describe. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Zack smiled, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're still here. But you're right. You've come a long way. And now, it's time to think about the future." Thera looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "I still don't know what to do next. I came here to find a cure for my people, but I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to do that. Zack nodded thoughtfully. I know the mission is important to you, Thera. I can see that. But maybe the first step isn't about the cure. It's about figuring out what you want from this life. You've been through so much, and now it's time to focus on healing yourself. Once you're ready, we can figure out the next steps together. For a long moment, Thera didn't speak. She looked at the flames dancing in the fireplace, their flickering glow casting shadows on the walls. She had come to Earth with a purpose, a mission that had driven her for so long. But in this moment, she realized something. Maybe she had been so focused on saving others that she had forgotten to save herself. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind of quiet that only comes from understanding and trust. Thera felt a peace inside her that she hadn't known in a long time. And it was all because of Zack. He had saved her in more ways than one. I think you're right, she said softly, her voice steady. Maybe I've been thinking about the wrong thing. I've spent so much time focused on my mission that I've forgotten what it means to take care of myself. Maybe it's time to figure that out first. Zack smiled, relieved that she was beginning to see it too. Take all the time you need. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Thera's heart swelled with a new feeling. Hope. It was something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time, not since the day she had left her home planet to find a cure. But here, in this cabin with Zack, she felt like there could be a future. Not just for her people, but for herself. Over the next few weeks, Thera focused on her recovery. Zack helped her regain her strength, both physically and emotionally. They spent their days talking, working together, and learning about each other's worlds. They weren't just two people from different species anymore. They had become partners, a team. And as the days passed, Thera began to realize something important. The cure for her people might still be possible, but it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about living. It was about finding a reason to keep going, no matter how difficult the journey was. And now, with Zack by her side, she knew she had something worth fighting for. One day, as they stood outside together, watching the sun set behind the trees, Thera looked at Zack with a smile. "Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with gratitude, "for giving me this chance." Zack smiled back, his heart light. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together, remember." And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thera knew that, no matter what the future held, she had found something more important than a cure. She had found hope, friendship, and the strength to move forward.